Welcome to the With You webinar from Westwood Community Church. My name is Kevin Klingbiel, and today we're talking about navigating job loss and job transition. We're super excited that you've joined us, and we trust and hope that this is going to be an encouragement to you and where you are, and maybe a season that you find yourself in, or maybe you know somebody who has lost their job or is in job transition. This hopefully will be a great resource for them. We have two amazing guests that I'm going to allow to introduce themselves and tell a little bit more about their background. So we'll start with you, Scott. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in human resource?
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Hello, everybody. We've been, with my family, we've been coming to Westwood since 2005. And I'm married to my wife, Paige, and we've got 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. I serve currently as the leadership board chair, and I've been on the leadership board for 4 years now, since 2016. But in my professional career, I've spent my entire 30 years working in human resources, 20 of which have been at General Mills. And prior to that, I spent 2 years as the head of HR for a private robotics company in Iowa, and then 8 years with Abbott Labs in Chicago and San Francisco in the pharmaceutical and diagnostic industry. So in addition to that, I also run Billy Goat Consulting, which is an LLC that's focused on HR and leadership advisory, where we do everything from working with companies to establish a vision, mission, and value statement, to ongoing monthly mentoring, to even helping families to develop a family mission statement that hangs on their wall that kind of establishes their values and their purpose as a family. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Why don't I hand it over to you, Paul? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks for having me tonight. So as Kevin said, my name is Paul Fox, and my wife Jill and I have been attending Westwood since 2015. We have 2 kids, Grayson and Thea. They are kindergarten and first graders, and they keep our lives busy, to say the least. At Westwood, I've had the opportunity to be involved with our college ministry, which is a summer program geared at our college students. Lead VBS in the summer, that's Vacation Bible School for our younger kids. That's just an action-packed week. And then I've also had the opportunity to lead a Haiti mission trip with 50 high school students in the last couple of years. So really have enjoyed just being a part of the Westwood community. Outside of church, I love to spend time with my family. We love to entertain, we love to be outside. Summer is probably our favorite time of year, so we are just excited to finally have some nice weather peeking around the clouds. Professionally speaking, I've spent 15 years here in Minneapolis. I started my career with Target Corporation 15 years ago. I spent my first 5 years with Target in field leadership positions, leading teams, transitioned into a more traditional HR path for my last 5 years with Target. So I was an HR generalist. I spent a lot of time hiring and working with leadership teams at that point, moved into a training and development role, and then left Target to go to REI, which is an outdoor retailer based in Seattle, Washington. I spent 5 years with REI as an HR business partner. I worked with corporate functions along with field teams, really working with senior leaders again at kind of all things development and engagement. And then for the last 6 months now, I've been on a new journey transitioning to a local med tech company here in town, Medtronic. And I'm a talent management consultant, which means I get to work with our internal facing team around development of our more senior leaders. So really excited to spend the evening with you guys, and thanks again, Kevin, for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have both of you, both amazing backgrounds and definitely gifted in this area and can help a bunch of people kind of navigate this season for themselves or for others. Well, I want to give people a little bit of the lay of the land as we navigate Zoom together. One of the things you'll see at the bottom is an opportunity to submit questions and answers. So if you're engaging with us and you have a specific question that you would like either Scott or Paul to answer, you can submit those, send those right over to me, and I'll be sure to get those into our conversation tonight. You can also chat with me. Feel free to send me a note if you have something that you want to raise with me or are looking for some specific information. Happy to navigate that with you. But we thought a great place for us to start is actually the end. And so we want to start on a high note, on a positive, with a vision for the future. And so we're going to start with you actually potentially, or someone you know, accepting a position and transitioning into a new role. We know that there's a lot that comes with a new job. there may be staff culture, there may be company culture, there may be leading in a different way. And so we thought, what a great way to start by looking to the end, thinking positively. And so Scott, as we start to talk about that, do you have any key notes or things that we could implement as we step into a new role or transition into a new company?
Well, I've got a couple thoughts, and then maybe Paul could jump in and add some as well. But first of all, congratulations on accepting the ideal job and making your way through the other end of the job search process. Sometimes as we step into that, it feels like it's a long way to the other side of the tunnel. And we're going to spend some time tonight talking about what to do in those early stages. But this is a moment of celebration. And by the way, it's not unusual even in the interviewing process to maybe get a question about what would you do in your first 90 days when you start. And I specifically mentioned the 90 days because I'm a big fan of Michael Watkins' work in that area. He wrote a book called The First 90 Days. And the premise of that is, if the president gets 100 days when he first starts in office or she starts in office, then many times we as new employees or even as leaders only have 90 days. And so what are you going to do with that? And so a couple of things that I'd recommend is really start by understanding what's the business scenario that you're in, regardless of what function you may be starting in. Are you in a turnaround where you're needing to do something significantly differently? Are you in a startup where the job has never existed before? Are you in a sustaining success model where you just need to take the success that's been there already and find one more thing to make it better? I think by really defining what the business situation is will help to lay the path for the steps ahead. And then a couple other things that I'd recommend are really going on a listening tour early on and identifying key stakeholders and finding out what's their vision for what you should accomplish. And then you combine that with the things that you're hoping to accomplish along the way. What did Henry Ford say? If I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And instead he invented a car. And so I think it's important to know what people are expecting from us, but it's also important to bring our own innovation along the way. And then the last thing I just add is if you're in a people management role, to engage your staff in the process as well. And one tool that I've found that's really effective was a best practice that General Electric had put in place many years ago called the New Leader Assimilation. And it really walks you through an opportunity to engage with your team to just accelerate that connection process. And it gives you a chance to answer some key questions early on, like what are your core expectations or philosophies as a leader? And to really hear from your team, what do they see as the barriers to your success as a leader, the barriers to our success as a team, and what are some early ideas to how we can overcome that together?
Awesome. Paul, anything to add?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned in my introduction, I am 6.5 months into a new role. So this all feels very real, to kind of the world I'm in. And so I think Scott has brought up a couple great points, and I would start where he started, which is celebrate. Congratulations. You've accepted a new job. That's a accomplishment and something you need to celebrate along the way. So once you pause, you've celebrated whatever that means for you and for your family. Now it's time to get to work. And so, as I've started this new company, I would really start from this place of grace. So when you start a new job, you're starting a new job. You've got to learn a new company. You've got to learn new policies. You have to learn a new team. You have to learn your job. I mean, you will come home and probably be exhausted every night, and that's okay. So give yourself a little bit of grace along the way. But I think the way that you navigate through that is back to what Scott shared. It's that having a plan. So I think 90 days is a great, kind of benchmark to set when you start. I won't reiterate, all the things that Scott touched on, but I would suggest that 90 days is critical, but realistically, it's going to take 6 to 9 months to really probably start to hit your groove. And one of the things that's been really helpful for me as I've spent my first 6 months transitioning into this new role, really just a few things. It's continuing to remember what I'm great at. The company hired me for my strengths, and I need to keep coming back to those strengths. And so I'd encourage you, as you're learning a new role, to think about what are those great things that I bring, because that's a valuable skill set even from day one. And how do I use those to create wins very quickly within the organization and to build my reputation, build my brand within the organization. I'd encourage you to keep the long game in mind as well. There's going to be days where you feel overwhelmed and you are wondering what you got into. Did you make the right decision? What on earth are you doing? You came there for a reason. Keep that in mind and keep plugging away and working towards what it is you're working towards. And then the last thing that I would share, and I think it's something that Scott and I will touch on throughout this, is this idea of a board of directors, a community, whatever you want to refer to it as, but have those people in your life who are going to support you and walk through this with you. I can't tell you the amount of times, again, over the last 6 months that I've picked up the phone to call an old coworker to just talk through a situation because I needed someone that knew me in a work environment that could give me some advice, or I've leveraged my wife as a sounding board, or I've looked to someone as an encourager. And you're going to need all of those people, both inside the company and outside the company, as you successfully transition into this new exciting journey for life. So those are a few additional things I would add to what Scott already shared.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think we want to start positive. There's so much negative in the world, and let's dream about what it's going to look like down the road. But that doesn't negate what you may be experiencing now, or what a loved one is experiencing today, or this week, or this month, and that can be a challenging season. And I'm one of the pastors here at Westwood, so I can't forget about this. That when we get to the end, it can be really, really helpful for us to look back and see how God has moved in those seasons. And so there's so much emotion that comes with a job loss or a job transition. If you were speaking to somebody who maybe had just lost their job, or they're going through a transition at work, maybe their hours got cut back, what would you tell them? How would you encourage them? Where would they start in navigating all that they're navigating in this season?
Yeah, really good question, Kevin. And I think where I would start in having a few friends who find themselves in that position right now, whether it's having recently been furloughed, or maybe it is job loss. I would always start from that place of personal belief and conviction for me, which is our hope is in Jesus Christ. And so I share that because I start with this idea that you are not your job. And you can't let this experience define who you are, because it's not who you are. It's a part of you, but it's not, in its entirety. And so I think just reminding them that they are valuable, that they are special, they're created in God's image, is the most critical kind of reset during those tough times. And it's not just job loss. I mean, I think that's any area of life. We need to always bring ourselves back to that foundational belief that we would have as Christian believers. But I think, then moving beyond that, there's I think there are different situations, whether it's, looking for a job altogether, it's being furloughed, but I think it's then acknowledging that it's okay to have emotions. You should have emotions about that. There's going to be different kind of seasons that you feel. You're going to have sadness. There's probably going to be loss. There's going to be some excitement about what's next. And all of those are good and okay. But how are you processing those in all of these things? And what I would always bring this back to is having a plan. So, navigate those emotions, but have a plan forward. You need to figure out where you need, where you're working towards, and who's going to help get you there. I'm going to pause there because I know that this is something that Scott spoke on last time, and it really resonated with me, just this idea of emotions and how to process through those. So Scott, I might turn it over to you, and I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of that question around emotions and how you navigate that upon job loss and transition.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely would reinforce what you said, Paul, that this idea of just acknowledging the emotion that's there, and whether other people can see it or not, if it's just going on inside. I think that's where, relying on the people around us to help us through this and to walk with us, in the process. It's we're stepping into a time of uncertainty. And yet we're coming from a place of familiarity, whether it's the workplace that we've been going to, or the friends, or the commute, or the physical advantages of the location. There's all kinds of things that are all of a sudden going to feel different. And we move into this role, we need to lead ourselves through this change process, and maybe even lead other people around us that maybe are impacted by our job loss or job reduction as well. And so what I've found over the years is that people tend to fall into one of three stages, and they don't necessarily stay in one of those stages. They work their way through that. But there's, I think, an acknowledgement or an understanding of what those stages could be, sometimes can be helpful. And so, One of those stages that I find, having been in the room, sometimes when those messages have been communicated and then working with that employee coming out of that communication from the manager, is some individuals put their emotion towards looking back, and they challenge the decision. They they get upset, and they put their energy in that place. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to agree with a judgment or the decision that's been made on behalf of us, but moving to that middle stage, which sometimes we see as well, where you just don't know what to do. You're kind of frozen in place a little bit. You maybe never face something like this, and it's unclear as to where you're being led or what's going to happen next. And then you hope to get to that third stage, which is really a forward-looking, solution-oriented approach that puts the past behind and moves on in the process of discovery as to what this opportunity is going to provide and what is it going to uniquely provide you. I think that's where that board of directors, Paul, that you had referenced earlier, can be so important, because those are those few individuals that know you so well. They're there to encourage you through that process. They're there to speak from the heart, and you're probably going to receive it better because it's somebody you trust and you've been through times with them before. And may I just suggest, since we're thinking about this tonight from a faith standpoint, that you make God that chairman of your board, because the job search process is going to have its ups and downs. There's going to be possibly some dark days there. It's going to be cloudy, and with God as your chairman of the board, he's the one that's going to break through. He's going to be the sunshine that's going to break through those clouds. And he's going to be the person we can place our hope in through this times.
Yeah, absolutely. And both Paul and Scott have referenced the previous webinar that Scott and I did together on navigating job loss. And you can find that on our Westwood website. We'd love for you to engage with that and get any questions that you have answered there, and we can navigate that. But I do want to remind you that right at the bottom of your screen, you can submit your questions to us. And our hope is to be able to answer some of those things that you are facing maybe today, or somebody who has. So we'll start by talking about, okay, so we've gone through the grief process, and now we're at the stage where we're looking forward. We're ready to start the process of looking for a new job. And I love the simple practice that Scott shared with us last time we were together of creating an ideal job profile. Scott, will you share a little bit more about what that meant, what that looks like for you, and how you would explain it to our guests?
Absolutely. One of the books that I read a while ago was by David Allen. It was called Getting Things Done. And some of you maybe have read that book before too. And sometimes what he talks about in that process of getting things done is, what is your immediate next step? Sometimes when you're trying to solve something that's really complex and it's unclear as to what you should do next, because there's so many things you can think of. One of the things that most of us do in these situations is we immediately go to job boards or job postings and begin to look for what would be available in the marketplace. It seems really natural. Begin to send our resume out. And I'd really encourage people to, before doing that, to just take some time to just reflect on what is it that you're really ideally looking for? Because if we don't know what that is, how are we going to know that we found it once we get to that stage of offers coming in? Or if you're fortunate enough to be in that situation that multiple offers are coming in at the same time, how do you discern which is the right one for you? And I think that idea of really starting with, what are the 3 to 5 things that are absolute needs for you? And then what are the things that are wants? And distinguishing between those things along the way. And they may be different for each of us, but a need for you maybe is the compensation. Maybe it's the culture of the organization. Maybe it's the person you're working for, the mission, vision, values, the commute distance, the local geography. Not sure what that could be, but think of it almost as if you're house hunting. And once again, you could spend a whole year looking for the perfect house that meets 99% of your criteria, or you can find, in a shorter time period, something that meets 90% of your criteria, but meets your most important criteria. So the idea of knowing the difference between a need and a want in identifying that ideal profile would be the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing I'd say is build out, once you've done that, and identify the characteristics of what you believe to be a tier 1 offer, and then a tier 2 offer and a tier 3 offer. And as you build out on that, you're starting to sacrifice some of those things that would make a job ideal, but it would still make it good. So you go from great to good to, okay, not bad, but I do need a job, right now. And so, and then do your search looking for all 3 of those things from the very beginning. Because many times what I see is folks will just focus on the ideal opportunity. And boy, that's wonderful when that actually happens. But we are working through a job search here during a global pandemic with very high unemployment, and that may not happen exactly that way. And so not getting too far into your search where then you regret that you hadn't started more broadly. You can always turn down an offer, but you can't turn down an offer that you never received.
Yeah, and I think that once we've created this ideal picture, right? So we've created tier 1, we've created tier 2, and we've created tier 3. The first reaction for many of us would be to just jump on the job board and start searching for jobs that fit into those categories. But one of the terms that we hear a lot about is networking, this idea of connecting with other people. Paul, what are some of the practices or things that you've seen in networking that have been really successful that some of our guests could learn from?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, just quickly before I go there, there's something, Scott just shared and it resonated. I would reiterate maybe a different way. And it's this idea that sometimes we need to slow down to speed up. What I mean by that is, his idea of the natural reaction when we experience job loss is often to hit the job board and to just start applying. And sometimes because we want to control the situation, we want to take action, and I'm that way. But sometimes slowing down, which would mean having a plan, having a strategy, as Scott just talked about, identifying tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 opportunities. Although that may be difficult in the few days that you do that or a week that you do that, I believe you see that pay dividends then when you start actively engaging at the point where you're starting to network, you're starting to apply for jobs, because your time is precious. You want to use that well, and you use that well by having a plan. So again, I just go back to sometimes slowing down will actually allow you to accelerate as you get into it, as opposed to just jumping right into kind of action mode that we often are inclined to do. So coming back then, I think to your question around just networking, where do you start? Or maybe that's what I heard was networking, and for me, what I would share with this group is, of the 3 companies I've been at, so Target, REI, and Medtronic, 2 of those 3 opportunities or companies have been directly connected through a personal network. And so networking is critical. And if you haven't done networking and you find yourself looking for work, you don't need to panic, but the suggestion would just be start thinking about who's in your network. Your networks are very, very broad. For me, my network originally was, personal friends. So my first job came through a high school friend of mine who'd had an internship, who knew I was looking for an opportunity, knew what some of my skills were, and she matched me with an interview opportunity that led to my first career at Target. My opportunity at Medtronic that I'm in now came to me through a network that I had built while at Target. So someone that I had worked with 7 years prior, had loosely stayed in contact with while at REI, reached out to see if I would be interested in an opportunity there. And so your network grows and is probably bigger than you think. I'm going to steal a few things that Scott shared last time, just around networking and thinking about your network. Your network is probably first and foremost that kind of social network around you. So friends, family, think about those people that you have a personal relationship with, that you connect with pretty consistently. But then it extends beyond that. Who do they know? Who could they connect you with? And that's why bringing those individuals into this transition is important, because they can be spokespeople for you. They will help you. They care for you. They want to see you find that next right opportunity. So think about who they can connect you with. Think about old coworkers that you've worked with. LinkedIn is an amazing way to connect. It's just one of many kind of social media tools out there that you can leverage. I would encourage you, if you don't have a LinkedIn account, to make sure that that's a part of that slowing down process strategy, is go out and set up a LinkedIn account. Make sure you have a picture, make sure that it professionally reflects you. It's kind of your online resume presence. But back to your networks, you've got that social, that close network. You move out to that second ring, who are they connecting you with? Think of where you went to school. I went to Iowa State, so who could I connect with that maybe has an Iowa State connection? That's going to resonate. For Scott and I and you. We think about Westwood Church. There's connections there. There's a lot of connections that we have naturally just as we've done life. So starting to think about who those connections are that you need to re-engage with as you identify future opportunities is really going to help you find, I think, your way into the next right opportunity for yourself.
Mhm.
Scott, how about you? What would you share?
Well, I think those are all fantastic points, Paul. And one of the nice things about tools like LinkedIn is that through the AI technology, they make that a little bit easier for us too. So you make a connection and then it suggests 5 more that are maybe in their second tier or their second ring that you could reach out to. All of this reminds me that one of the challenges that some of us have as we step into these situations is number one, being bold enough to ask for help. And then number two is being humble enough to accept it. And I know when Paige and I had we were expecting our first child, Austin, we were living in San Francisco Bay Area, and we were 2,400 miles away from our families back in Illinois. And Paige was on bed rest for the second half of her pregnancy. And that meant that Christmas that year, we weren't able to travel and be with our families. And it was an amazing time that we really had to rely on the people around us who, by the way, we didn't even know very well. And it really challenged our thinking in some of those areas and helped us to become much more comfortable with that, and also comfortable with the idea that we may not be able to repay the support that we're getting right now to that individual. We knew we wouldn't be living out there for more than a couple of years, but we can find other ways to give that back in other scenarios. And by the way, the people that were offering to help, they were offering to help out of the kindness of their heart or because of their relationship with us, or maybe because of their belief system. And it wasn't necessarily because they were expecting something back. And so, maybe a time that you just have to practice being bold and making ask. Very few people are going to say no. And if they do, then well, good for them. You got a candid response, but then also be in a position that you accept the assistance because this could be a time that you're not going to be able to do it all by yourself.
Yeah, and I think this points back to kind of what we started with around navigating the emotion, right? So like for many of us, there's a sense of maybe shame or guilt around a job loss, and we're afraid to share that with others because of what they may think about us, because our identity is wrapped up in what we do for a living. And so this is really a practice of getting through those stages of navigating this job loss, and it opens you up. It makes you available to ask for help, and makes you bold and then humble enough to receive it as well. I think both of those things are super helpful. One of the other elements that many people think about right when they lose their job is, oh man, I haven't updated my resume in years. Paul, where would someone start if they're in that place that their resume is outdated and it's a couple jobs behind them? Where would you recommend that they get started?
Yeah. Well, before I directly answer where should they get started, I will say for those who do have an updated resume or who have continued to keep it updated, that's good. And if you have an opportunity now to start fresh, my advice going forward would be every year or so, maybe you pull that out and you add an accomplishment or two, right? So I think that could be helpful as a move forward. But you're in a spot not uncommon where you have a resume that's potentially outdated. Maybe you haven't even created a resume. Resumes are extremely personal. They're a document that reflect you. At the same time, there are so many different varieties and versions. You can probably drive yourself crazy trying to find the perfect resume. So I guess where I would start is there's no perfect resume. You need to have a resume that professionally reflects who you are. And so I know for myself, what I've done when I've wanted to go back and move forward with an updated resume is I go back to this board of directors. I have a close personal friend who is in recruiting, and he's typically my starting point. I'll make some updates and I'll go to him and ask him for some guidance and recommendations. Ultimately, it's a document I own. Again, I want it to be reflective of me. The resume is Paul Fox on paper. That's going to get me the job opportunity, the interview rather. And then I get to sell myself when I get into the interview. So I think if you find yourself needing to look at updating your resume, hopefully you've got a person in that close connection that can help you. If not, there's a lot of great tools and resources available out online. It's just a simple starting point. I mean, do a Google search for, resumes. You're going to get lots of options, and just start. You just have to start someplace. I think what people typically tend to not do is, in my opinion, is capture enough of their kind of key core accomplishments. It's hard to sum up years of a career in a single page or in a couple pages. And your resume length will depend on, I'd say, how long you've been professionally working. So, if you've been in the marketplace for just a few years, you probably are able to capture everything in just a single page. But if you're pushing, 6, 7+ years and you've got multiple experiences, you're probably moving on to a second page. That's okay as well. So I think you want to have some examples of where to start. Hopefully someone in your network's able to be, someone who can review it with you, give you, again, a second set of eyes or appearance. And I know, again, Scott, I'll kick it to you because last time I think you talked about some of the tools specifically that you've used or leveraged before that have been helpful as you've gone through the resume process.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think of a general rule of thumb is the resume is designed to get you the interview. And then the interview is the thing that's designed to get you the job. And so if you think about that, you want to put just enough on that resume to really entice that reader to want to know more about you or to get some key questions answered. And that's your chance to expand the conversation, hopefully do it live or in today's world, through video in the interviewing process to go from there. I also see that some people have had success at also abbreviating their resume into a one-page snapshot. And that snapshot's an opportunity for you to really summarize the traditional chronological way of discussing your background and focus more on what is your core expertise, what are the most important successes that you've had in your career so far. That could be helpful as an introductory document if you're just having a networking or virtual coffee chat with somebody. I also find that having a document like that complements your resume are both nice documents that when you get into completing online applications, which can be, depending on the applicant tracking system that the organization has, it can take some time, and it sometimes relies on you to provide summary documentation of your experiences. And if you've already reduced that into writing, you can just pull that off of those documents, cut and paste it to help you to get through the application process a little quicker. The last thing I'd say is something I touched on in the last webinar is that there are some free resume critiques that are available out there as well through LinkedIn and through Glassdoor and other sites that you can find on the web. I'd say that what's interesting about that is it does provide an independent perspective, which I think is important either way, even to check for grammatical errors or spelling and things like that. But once again, it's just one person's opinion as to maybe what you should have in your document. And going back to, Paul, what you had said is that resume really is your statement, your personal signature as to who you are and what you've done. And so take the input, but in the end, make sure that you feel like you own that document and it's really who you are. And that's because you're the one that's going to be accountable for how that's perceived in the marketplace once you share that.
Yeah, we did get our first question. So somebody asked, are professional resume services worth the cost? I think you just touched on that a little bit, Scott, but Paul, what's your perspective on professional resume services? Are they worth the cost?
So I've never used one, and that doesn't mean they're not worth the cost. It just, for the opportunities, again, I've found that through my, again, personal network and just probably my background, I've been able to have a resume that has kind of fit the build for the opportunities that I've been looking for. Having said that, I have multiple friends who are in that line of work, and I've seen the kind of work they do, and I think there's a time and a place for that. If you I think depending on the level of job you're looking for, that might fit more of a niche. I think the other spot where it might be appropriate is you feel like I don't have anyone in my network, or I don't have that kind of close personal contact. I don't have maybe confidence in my own ability to do this, and I know that it's really important. There's a lot of opportunities and a lot of individuals, who can do that for you, who will do a good job. And I think the prices really vary. So it's what are you willing to pay for the opportunity for that interview? Do you feel like you need the support or not? So I think, there's a time and a place for it, and you just have to discern if that's going to be beneficial based on the kind of work you're looking for and what your support structure is or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that varies based upon industry and all of those different things too. I'm sure that there's different levels of that. So we've done the networking, we've created a resume, and now we're on to the interview process and getting ready for interviews. Scott, what are your tips that you would provide somebody with as they prep for an interview?
Well, I'll tell you, defining interviews in this COVID world that we're in right now, it's just so completely different, than if we were answering that question 6 months or a year ago. And the name of the game right now is to develop a new competency, and that's to feel comfortable in front of a video camera, from wherever you're videoing from. And that's likely to be the case, at least for the first couple rounds of interviews, depending on what the future holds for us. And so if you haven't had a chance to do this yet, I think there's a couple of 3 to 5 minute videos that are out on YouTube that really give you some good tips on just getting things correct, like the lighting, or ensuring that the camera is at eye level, almost as though you're having a conversation with somebody in person, trying to simulate to the best of your ability a professional atmosphere, reducing sound, thinking about how you're going to dress. But I think one of the old adages is practice. And I think that practicing, whether it's practicing seeing yourself on video and being comfortable, seeing yourself talk as you're talking to somebody else through the camera, or maybe more importantly, just doing some mock interviews with some people that you trust as well. There's great value in that. And if you have the ability to record that, whether it's audio or if you can, do a full playback, many times by watching or listening yourself, you'll be able to self-correct a few things that you wish you would have done differently, as well as the person that's asking those questions could provide some feedback afterwards as well. The last thing I'd say is I referenced Glassdoor a few minutes ago, and if you're not familiar with that site, I would encourage you to go out and do some research on the organization that you're going to interview with on Glassdoor. Most organizations have an organization or company page, and it actually gives you an opportunity to see what's the difficulty rating that has been placed on that organization's interview process. Many of the people that have interviewed with them already will post standard questions that they've received, and so it'll give you an idea of the type of questions or the approach that organization has. Are they primarily focused on behavioral-based interviews? Do they do panel interviews versus one-on-one interviews? Whatever that may be, and you may find that it helps you to prepare better, and also to help you to answer that question in the end. Yes, they're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them, and it may put you in a better position to know, is this the right fit for you as you're making a decision if you're fortunate enough to receive an offer.
Yeah.
One of the things that I always struggled with, Paul, was, and I know it's a little bit different these days, but what is acceptable kind of protocol for an interview? How should I dress? What should I bring? Do I bring a copy of my resume? What do I need? How do I follow up? What are some of your tips for that, Paul?
Well, Kevin, great question. And I think a lot of it depends. It depends on the kind of work. It depends on the employer. I'd go back to my recent experience. So I was interviewing with 2 different companies, and 2 very different companies at the same time. One was a small startup company, fewer than 25 employees. They were very clear about what they stood for. The other, a large established med tech company. And so, to Scott's point, it was doing the research ahead of time. It was understanding, what I could gather from Glassdoor, what I could gather from their website. What was their culture? What would be appropriate dress for that interview? In the one case, I had a personal connection, so I was able to reach out to them and find out what would be appropriate dress and what would be kind of the interview format. The other company, it was more just, again, power of interpretation. So what could I see on their website? It was clear as they talked about what was important to them, kind of this innovative rec list, that how I would dress for that interview. was going to be different than how, again, I would dress for this established larger med tech company. So I think it's about doing your homework ahead of time to figure out what's going to be appropriate. I think it's always wise to bring a copy of your resume. I mean, they are likely going to have it, but I think what you don't want to do is get in there and have them not have it, or maybe they've been running meeting to meeting and they don't have a copy and they ask you for it and you don't have it. So absolutely, I would recommend bringing a few copies of your resume just so you have that on hand. I also think preparing some questions ahead of time. As Scott said, it's a two-way conversation. And semantics aside, I guess, interview, I think of it as a conversation. It's a two-way dialogue. You're getting to talk about yourself and your experiences, and you're getting to ask questions to decide, is this the right fit for you? Because you're making a commitment to this company. If you're offered a job and you say yes, that's a huge investment of time and of energy for you. And so don't lose sight of the idea that it's not just about them learning about you, it's about you learning about them. So coming with questions that are important. And I think, those questions that are important are not just about the company, kind of the products that they make, the processes, but it's also about the people, the mission. Someone might say that our mission is X, but you can figure that out pretty quick. Do they live by that mission when you start asking questions? Or the power of observation? How was I treated when I showed up for my interview? What were people like when I interacted with them? So don't lose sight of the opportunity that you have to also be a part of the interview process and experience. I would just add, if we've got a moment, back to the mock interview. That's something that we did a lot of, especially when I was at Target. And behavior-based interviews Scott referenced. So the idea of someone saying, tell me about a time. They want to hear your behaviors. How did you react in a certain situation? For me, I work best when I'm able to put some thoughts down on paper and have a plan. And so I would really encourage you, if you've not done that and you find yourself preparing for interviews, really make sure that you've identified those 6 to 10 things, stories I call them, that you're most proud of. That you want to make sure that in that interview, when given the opportunity, you're able to tell that story well. And oftentimes individuals will get in that interview and they're too responsive to just the question that was asked. And if they go in prepared with some questions or some answers rather that they know they want to share, you're going to find a way to fit that into the interview. And so structuring them in a situation, behavior, outcome structure. So you write it down on paper. What was the situation? What was your behaviors? And that's really 70% of your answer. What did you do? That's what the employer wants to know. How do you think? How do you act? How do you interact? How do you lead? And then the outcome. And that's key. And I think that's where we can sometimes miss when we give answers, is we forget to tell the outcome. And that can be numerical, that can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, but you need to give them something of the cherry on the top, is what we called it at Target. And then finally, I back to resonating with what Scott shared about having that person or that process practice. So whether it's a family member, whether it's the mirror, whether it's your cell phone or recording yourself, you want to know how you come across and be prepared to go into that interview, because that's a great opportunity, and you don't want to pass that chance up.
Yeah, absolutely. What I love is that our question leads us almost right back to where we started. So the question that we got is, any tips on negotiating a starting salary? Scott, what do you think about tips for negotiating a starting salary?
Wow, that's a really good question. And it's a tricky one, because there's a lot that goes into a negotiation, in terms of establishing your negotiation pillars on your side and the other side, and maybe what's been set up to that point as well. I think there's some pros and cons with negotiating, because I think that one could say that if you already had in mind what your expectations were and you were clear about that in the opportunity, it is okay to just accept the offer as it is. And so don't feel like you have to negotiate either. There are some organizations that make it a practice to not negotiate at all. And the reason why they don't is that they're an organization that is so foundationally based on trust and doing the right thing always, that extends beyond just how they treat their employees, but it extends into how they treat their candidates as well. And so, if you're working with a high values, mission-oriented company, by challenging the negotiation, it could begin to send you down a path they could be complicated because they may come back, and this has come out of my mouth a few times. We would want to give you the very best offer from the beginning, which is what we gave to you. We wouldn't want you to feel like you have to come back and ask for more, because that establishes a practice for your entire employment that we wouldn't want to start before you've even had your first day. So that's one side of the idea of, if it's a really attractive offer that meets all your expectations, don't feel like you have to negotiate it. The other side of that is that sometimes you say, well, what do you got to lose? And it may be that an organization may not have flexibility to adjust the base pay. They may not be able to adjust the bonus plan if there's an incentive that's associated with that, because many times those things are tied into schematic comp plans that are already in place. However, you may be able to, by asking the question, receive a sign-on bonus that you wouldn't have gotten already, or something like that. And so, I would just say that there's pros and cons to doing it either way, and to be thoughtful about how you do that, and be careful about how you do that. But if you feel compelled to do it, then find the right words, and make sure you ask the right person also. And decide who that is based on who you've established the best rapport, whether that's the hiring manager, whether that's maybe that HR recruiting professional, that you can softball a question like that to first and see what happens.
Paul, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I would, and I think Scott mentioned this just as he was talking about some of the different levers that you can pull when you think about an offer, whether that's base pay, whether that's paid time off, whether that is, sign-on bonus. Just think of it as kind of a basket of benefits, if you will. And at the end of the day, you want to feel comfortable that the basket that you're walking away with is something that you're comfortable with. So it may be that your base pay was a little bit less than what you were hoping for, but you were able to work through something with vacation, or maybe you realize that this is a job that's going to let you have more personal balance, and that's really what's important. So this idea of, I think, understanding and assigning a value to the different parts of the to the different parts of the offer. And you need to be comfortable that when you say yes, that you're going to be able to walk in day one and feel like you're valued and respected, and that your paycheck reflects that, and your time, all of those things. But that can look different. So don't go in with such a clear idea that it has to be this base pay, because there's so many different things that really come into play when you start thinking about an offer and what's most important. I think the key piece for you to walk away, as I think Scott said, is that you've started the relationship off with this employer from a place of trust and of respect, and that you feel that as well as you start this new opportunity. So don't be afraid to ask if it seems appropriate and if it's what you need in order to feel like, this is where I can start. But think of it holistically, big picture, not just one piece of it, because there's many ways that companies are able to, reward and take care of their employees.
And I think it all goes back to what we started with, right? The tier 1, tier 2, decide what you're looking for, make a plan, and then have people around you that you can bounce ideas off of, right? Scott, you were going to add something. What would you add?
Well, as a career HR person, I always like to go into role play mode, in these situations when a question comes up that you're not anticipating. And so if we were to role play this for a minute, let's say that I was wanting to negotiate, I would maybe say something like this, and I'm just going to make this up on the spot, but, Kevin, thank you for the offer. I'm so excited about your organization and the possibility of accepting this offer and starting for you. And, I would like to review this with my spouse. I feel like that would be important to do. And would it be okay with this being Wednesday? Would it be okay if I got back to you by Friday? And then, assuming that you say yes, and you could say, I would like to review the offer in writing then. And as I go into my final determination whether I'm going to accept the offer or not, I just wanted to ask you a question. It's not an easy question for me to ask, but is there any element of this offer, whether it's the base pay or the number of weeks of vacation or anything like that, that's flexible? And that could be a way that you could step into a softer version of the conversation, just to test the temperature before you jump right into the deep end and say, I need $10,000 more on my base pay, otherwise I'm not going to join your organization. So that could be a softer way to maybe come in the side door versus coming in the front door. And you could even just if you're doing that, preferably face to face, but at least in a way, even through video, that I can see your nonverbals as well as your verbals, I'll probably give you a pretty good idea if you've got some room to push on that or not.
Well, I hope just based upon that simple role play, you can see why we invited Scott Swayne and Paul Fox to join us on today's Worthy webinar. We're so grateful that you joined us. We want to be respectful of your time, knowing that I'm sure you got a lot going on in your busy schedule. So we're going to wrap it up. But before we leave, I'd love to close in prayer. So would you guys pray with me? Gracious Father, we praise you and thank you for your goodness and your grace. And God, we know that there are people that are going to take in this webinar that are struggling, that maybe are hurting or grieving the loss of a job. And God, I pray that you would meet them right where they are, that you would bring peace, that you would bring hope in this season. God, we ask that you would give them wisdom as they search for a job, help them to think back on the tips and tools that Paul and Scott shared tonight. May it be a great resource for them as they navigate this season. God, we look to you for hope. We look to you for a measure of mercy that we need each and every day. God, we love you and we praise you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks, Scott. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate you being on.
Yep.
Have a great evening.
Have a good night.
Bye, everybody.